Democracy is hypocrisy. Stop pretending. You say you live in a democracy. You say your voice matters. You say the system belongs to the people, but look at your life. Look closely. Do you actually feel powerful? Do your choices shape the future? Or are you standing in line every few years, placing a mark on paper, then disappearing back into silence while decisions about your life are made somewhere far above your reach? That discomfort you feel? Good, because maybe for the first time you are. Being forced to ask a question nobody wants you to ask. What if democracy, as you experience it, is not what you were promised? You were told democracy means freedom, representation, equality. But your reality feels different. You work hard. Prices rise, promises repeat, leaders change, the language changes, the slogans change, yet somehow the same frustrations remain, and still you are told to trust the process. Think about that. You are expected to believe in a machine that keeps disappointing you simply because criticizing it feels dangerous. Not illegal. Dangerous. Because the moment you question it, people panic. How dare you be grateful that at least you have a vote? A vote? You think power begins and ends with a vote? That is the first illusion you need to destroy. Because if democracy only exists when someone asks for your support, but disappears the moment you demand accountability, what exactly are you participating in? Call it uncomfortable, call it cynical, call it unfair, but do not call it irrelevant. Because this affects your life, your future, your money, your opportunity. You carry the consequences of decisions you never truly control. And yet you are trained to believe participation equals influence. That is not a small misunderstanding. That is a dangerous habit. Here's the first uncomfortable truth. You confuse permission with power. You are allowed to speak, allowed to vote, allowed to complain. But ask yourself something brutal. When was the last time you felt heard? Not entertained, not distracted, not emotionally manipulated. There is a difference. Because systems survive when people confuse activity with impact. Noise would change. You post opinions. You argue online. You defend parties like sports teams. And what changes? You fight strangers while structures remain untouched. That should bother you. Because maybe the greatest hypocrisy is not democracy itself. Maybe it is the performance around it, the ritual, the illusion that participation automatically means control. Nobody likes hearing this because it forces responsibility back into your hands. And responsibility is heavy. It is easier to blame one politician, one election, one bad year. Harder to admit that sometimes entire systems become comfortable with appearances, comfortable with symbolism, comfortable with telling people they matter while making them feel powerless. And before you get defensive here, clearly, questioning democracy is not the same as rejecting freedom. That lazy argument protects weak thinking. You can value freedom and still ask difficult questions. You can appreciate rights and still recognize contradictions. Because pretending something is perfect does not strengthen it. It weakens it. Silence weakens it. Blind loyalty weakens it. Fear, criticism weakens it. And maybe, just maybe, the reason this conversation feels uncomfortable is because deep down you already know. Something feels broken. You feel it when promises sound rehearsed. You feel it when outrage becomes entertainment. You feel it when elections feel dramatic, but everyday life barely shifts. You feel it when people scream about change, but reward the same behavior again and again. That contradiction, that tension, that is where honesty begins. Here's another uncomfortable truth. You've been trained to confuse choice with control. Having options does not automatically mean having power. Picking between carefully packaged alternatives does not always equal freedom. Sometimes it just means choosing the version of disappointment you can tolerate. Harsh? Yes. But truth often sounds harsh before it sounds clear because clarity hurts. It exposes things, and exposure is uncomfortable. You want honesty? Here it is. Most people do not want real democracy. They want emotional comfort. They want their side to win. The beliefs confirmed, their fears validated. And when outcomes disappoint them, they become more determined to succeed. Suddenly, the system becomes unfair until it benefits them again. That cycle, that hypocrisy, it lives in people too, not just institutions. You cannot demand accountability while refusing self-reflection. You cannot complain about manipulation while rewarding empty performance. And you definitely cannot expect meaningful change while treating politics like entertainment. So what is the mindset shift? Simple. Stop asking who will save this. Start asking, what am I blindly accepting? That question changes everything. Because the moment you stop behaving like a spectator, you start seeing reality differently. You stop worshiping slogans. You stop confusing confidence with competence. You stop handing over your thinking to personalities, parties, or headlines. And suddenly something dangerous happens. You become harder to manipulate. That matters. Because systems fear independent thinkers more than angry crowds. Anger burns fast. Thinking less. So here's your challenge. Look at what you believe, not what you repeat, not what you inherit, what you genuinely believe. Question it. Pressure test it. Be honest enough to admit where reality does not match the promise. Because if democracy means anything at all, it should survive difficult questions. And if it cannot survive questions, then maybe the hypocrisy is deeper than you were ever told. You want to know the hardest truth. The system is not separate from you. That is the lie. That is the conflict. Point upward at leaders, at institutions, at corruption, at hypocrisy. And yes, sometimes criticism is deserved. But here is the question you avoid. What kind of society keeps rewarding the very behavior it claims to hate? Think about that carefully. You say you want honesty, yet confidence impresses you more than truth. You say you want integrity, yet performance keeps winning attention. You say you hate manipulation, yet outrage controls your focus every single day. That contradiction matters. Because systems do not appear from nowhere. They reflect habits, values, tolerance, expectations have become dangerously low. You know you feel that people celebrate promises instead of results, arguments instead of solutions, emotion instead of substance, noise instead of understanding, and then they act shocked when disappointment arrives again and again. At some point, disappointment stops being surprising. At some point, it becomes predictable. Why? Repetition leaves clues. Patterns matter, and patterns reveal truth. The pattern says this: people demand change emotionally, but resist change personally. That is uncomfortable. Good, it should be, because everybody wants accountability until accountability points back at them. You want responsible leadership. Then ask yourself, are you responsible with information, or do you chase headlines that confirm what you already believe? You want honesty? Do you reward honesty, or do you reward confidence that feels good? You want better decisions? Do you make careful decisions, or emotional ones? These questions are not attacks, they are mirrors, and mirrors make people uncomfortable because mirrors remove excuses. It is easy to criticize failure from a distance, harder to admit that society often feeds the very problems it complains about. Here is another harsh truth. Most people mistake passion for wisdom. Someone sounds emotional. Suddenly they trustworthy, but confidence proves nothing. Emotion proves nothing. Noise proves nothing. Evidence matters. Results matter. Consistency matters. Yet consistency is boring. Truth is often boring. Reality is usually complicated. And complicated answers do not go viral. Simple anger does. Simple blame does. Simple enemies do. That is dangerous, because the moment politics becomes entertainment, citizens become spectators, and spectators stop building. They react, they cheer, they boo. What they do not think deeply. They do not question deeply. They do not engage deeply. And then frustration grows. You have seen this cycle. Everybody is angry. Everybody feels unheard. Everybody claims disaster is near, and somehow nothing fundamentally changes. Why? Because outrage alone changes nothing. Emotion alone changes nothing. Complaints without responsibility change nothing. That truth hurts because it demands more from you, more discipline, more awareness, more honesty. Nothing. You. Yes, you. Because blaming systems without examining yourself creates helplessness, and helplessness becomes addiction. You start believing it is all broken. There is no point. My choices mean nothing. Be careful. That mindset destroys people, not because problems are fake, but because hopelessness kills action. And hopeless people become passive. Passive people become easy to influence, easy to divide, easy to distract. That is exactly why independent thinking matters. Not blind trust, not blind rebellion. Thinking, careful thinking, measured thinking, thinking strong enough to survive pressure. Here's the mindset shift you need. Stop asking who is the enemy and start to say behavior. That question changes everything, because systems are not magic. People respond to incentives. Attention shapes behavior. Power shapes behavior. Fear shapes behavior. Reward shapes behavior. Performance, you get performance. If society rewards outrage, you get outrage merchants. If society rewards shallow thinking, you get shallow leadership. Simple. Painfully simple. And maybe that is the most uncomfortable realization of all. Sometimes democracy looks hypocritical because people ask for seriousness while rewarding spectacle. That truth stings because it removes easy excuses. No villain, no simple answer, just responsibility. Messy responsibility, human responsibility, and humans hate responsibility. Why? Because responsibility means sacrifice, effort. Humility, patience, means admitting I may be wrong. That sentence scares people. Ego fights it. Identity resists it. But growth requires it. Societies grow the same way people grow through honesty, not denial, loyalty, not emotional comfort, honesty. So stop asking for perfect systems. There are none. Ask for stronger thinking, higher standards, more accountability, less performance. Because democracy, like anything built by flawed, humans become stronger only when people stop worshiping it blindly and start demanding that it live up to its own promises. And if you are unwilling to demand honesty from institutions, from leaders, from yourself, then do not act surprised when hypocrisy becomes normal. Because what people tolerate eventually defines them. You have seen enough now to stop pretending confusion is the problem. It is not. The problem is acceptance, quiet acceptance, daily acceptance, the kind that does not look like surrender, but functions exactly like it. You keep waiting for systems to change on their own. You keep waiting for better leaders, better outcomes, better promises. But here is the truth you avoid. Nothing meaningful improves while people stay passive. Nothing, not leadership, not accountability, not truth in public life. Everything responds to pressure. And pressure only exists when people stop being spectators. You have been trained to think your role is small. One vote. Opinion. One voice among millions. Small. Insignificant. Replaceable. That is how people become silent. That is how responsibility disappears without anyone noticing. But here is what that framing hides. Small actions become powerful when they are consistent, informed, and independent. Not emotional bursts, not temporary outrage, not online performance. Consistent awareness, consistent questioning, consistent refusal to accept shallow answers. That is where real influence begins. And yes, it's uncomfortable because it removes excuses. It removes the comfort of saying, I can't do anything you can. But it starts with something most people avoid. Thinking clearly when it is easier not to. Asking questions when answers would be more comforting. rejecting easy narratives when they feel emotionally satisfying. That is the real cost of awareness. Not money, not status, discomfort. Now, here is a truth that should stay with you. A society does not collapse suddenly. It weakens slowly. People stop paying attention when standards quietly drop, when criticism becomes rare, when questioning becomes discouraged, when participation becomes symbolic instead of meaningful. And by the time people notice, they are already inside the consequences. So if you are waiting for a dramatic moment to wake up, you have already missed the point. Awareness is not a moment. It is a habit, and habits decide everything. Here is the mindset shift you cannot avoid anymore. Stop treating yourself like a powerless observer. Start treating yourself like a responsible participant in how reality is shaped, not because you control everything, but because you influence more than you admit through what you accept, what you ignore, what you reward with your attention, what you repeat without thinking. That is influence, and influence always exists somewhere. The question is not whether it exists. The question is whether you are aware of how you use it. Now listen carefully. This is not about optimism. It is not about pretending systems are perfect. They are not. It is not about rejecting everything. That is just another form of laziness. It is about something harder. Disciplined thinking in a world built to distract you from. That means not reacting immediately, not accepting emotional narratives without evidence, not confusing confidence with truth, not mistaking repetition for correctness, and not letting frustration replace understanding. Because frustration without understanding becomes noise, and noise changes nothing. You want change? Then stop contributing to noise. Start contributing to clarity, even if it is unpopular, even if it slows you down, even if it makes you question things you previously believed. That is how real awareness forms, not through slogans, through reflection. And now the final truth. If democracy feels hypocritical, it is not only because of those in power. It is also because too many people have stopped demanding depth from themselves and from the systems they live in. That gap between expectation and engagement is where hypocrisy grows. So here is your call to action. Do not outsource your thinking. Do not outsource your responsibility. Do not outsource your awareness. Question mark. Accept less blindly. Think slower than your emotions want to. And act only after understanding, not after impulse. Because the moment you stop being a passive consumer of narratives, you start becoming something harder to manipulate. And that is the point. Not agreement, not obedience. Awareness. And once awareness is real, there is no going back to comfortable